Welcome to the patch notes update for patch notes 1.36. We are going to be covering parts 1, 2, and the first hotfix. These patches mainly cover preseason. We will be going not over every single change. There's a lot, but most of them are across the board changes. We will be covering the changes that cover across the board and roughly mentioning all of the characters it has affected, but not going in depth. I am Jin, and I'm here again with my co-host
Jignut, once again here to cover the patch notes.
We will be starting with the first change that we think has really affected it, the vertical launch system. The vertical launch system has shipped this patch, but not with everything you'd want it to. We'll see later the things that got added for it. To start us off though, we see VLS is changing day 3. It is having pretty decent speed, a slower descent speed, and a overall fast time for travel. We are seeing the host still controlling it like normal, and that you can break off of it. And we've also been seeing a lot of interesting things. For one, when you travel through a red zone, it still uses up timer, but you travel so fastly, it's usually around 5 seconds to go through an entire zone. And you have very large visibility. It's a lot larger than I was actively expecting. 12 vision range is surprisingly big, and it has been creating some problems that got addressed in the hotfix. Now, how do you feel that VLS has landed for preseason, Jignut?
I do think that, again, once they get all the changes down, it's going to be very good for the game, causing a lot less issues. There are definitely still some issues with it, some of which they fixed in the hotfix. I think the issue I had after playing with it a little bit is controlling it is a bit clunky in the air. I hope they work on that. But overall, I think the rotational changes it brings to the game are good.
Yeah, I can say that it's not perfect. However, it is so much more fun than last season, and they could keep everything as it is right now. I'd rather have an entire season of this compared to whatever it was last season. This is a lot of fun. Next, we have the Secret Labs. Secret Labs have been seeing a lot of changes as they are the de facto way that they've kind of tried to implement battle zones instead. We see the nice card keys for Gamma, the normal one, and later escaping. The overall macro for using a secret lab is taxing. I think they're figuring out how they want it to fit with the changes they made in the hotfix, but during preseason, these have just kind of been, we got one, I guess we're going in and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I think players have to get used to just keeping track of when to use them and when is best to use them, because you can only go to one in a game, which means if you do use the lesser version, you cannot use the better one later if you happen to get it. The Gamma card key lab was changed, we'll talk about that in the hotfix, but the rest of them you can get as early as night 2, and using it early can help you get used to snowballing, but again, the Gamma rewards are very high, so you are guaranteed giving that up. It's also worth noting that when you do TP out of the zones, you would just see which zones people are in, you don't actually know the number, which I think is a good change.
Yeah, that was a nice change I had noticed. To cover all of the labs again, as we did over the dev stream, but now we have a lot more information. The common lab gives you a lot of credits. When you pick up and use these credits, half of it will go to your other 2 teammates, and the full cost of it will go to you. Very good change. You can also buy in here. The mutant lab got some changes because it was too easy to get almost the same value that you would get off killing Gamma from these mutant labs. It was a very good boon to get. The abandoned lab, I think, could really use some ravens in it. Just killing a bunch of bats is not as fun, I think, as if you had a couple ravens in here.
There are boxes in each of the zones. I believe for the mutant lab and credit lab, they just have some minor credit rewards. In the abandoned lab, which has all the bats, there are drones in the boxes.
I would prefer if they added like some double guillotines in the boxes and then had ravens with the bats instead, though.
Yeah. You can get both drones and EMP drones from them. It's mostly just killing bats and getting out very quickly.
Yeah, this one feels the worst out of all the labs. I hope they do a little bit to help it out. And then the Gamma lab. Gamma has been changed, and probably we'll still see a couple more changes as we go through the season, especially towards the start. For right now, very interesting with the rewards it gives. It gives a guaranteed tax skill and an RNG up to a mithril, so it's an okay reward. We'll talk more about it in the hotfix.
It's also worth noting that since the patch is live, you can spend about 70 seconds in each lab in total.
Yep. Next, we are going to be covering how Terminate, Clutch, and Checkmate have affected the game. I think that the Terminate and Clutch features were very good and very much needed. I like them a lot. I do wish that Clutch got a faster revive than Terminate, though.
Yeah, just a slightly faster revive, since Clutch means both your teammates are already downed. Would be nice, but overall, just having this in the game is amazing.
Yeah, it's a very good change. Now, something that hasn't exactly landed the best for me has been Checkmate. I kind of want them to zoom in on the person who got the final kill.
I do as well. And while it looks nice and clean in the little video they have, in-game, when there's a lot of people blasting effects, it kind of just slows down and then just has bright effects covering the screen if everyone's using their abilities. It doesn't look the greatest.
Yeah, it hasn't exactly landed the mark that I want to see, but I know that just as they did with Terminate and Clutch, it's going to get better as time goes on, obviously. And then the last thing we're going to cover, as I mentioned earlier, Escape got a rework. It feels a lot better. There's a lot more counterplay on both sides because you're not just standing at a hyperloop and the second someone walks up and tries to CC you, you press the button and escape. You instead have a keycard that allows you to spawn the escape platform itself. This is really good because instead of the more I'm standing at a hyperloop forever, which obviously you can't even do anymore because of VLS, you can rat in a corner until enough teams have died to really make it viable for your escape to give you RP. All the other things from Escape, though, completely stayed the same. It's really just now you have a better way of ratting it out for these hard games.
Yep, you can now just spawn the teleporter wherever you want. And it's not an instant teleport anymore, but it is much easier to escape as a result.
Next, we have the main nerf to split farming. This was done really because it's just too effective at getting credits. And as mentioned before, getting credits has gotten even easier this time around. And the tempo isn't as balanced around battle zones anymore. So this is just a very good change. I feel like the flow of the game feels a lot better with this in it.
It is. And it is also worth noting that because it is 55 meters, if you're in adjacent zones, you actually can still farm separately whilst not getting affected by this diminishing returns or like separation bonus.
And then we have the changes to Lumi. I'm not 100% on these changes to Lumi. I think taking away the mobile kiosk is kind of a bad choice overall, but it does present some new options that we have access to. The first one is they've just lowered the amount of cameras and drones that you get from Lumi. These are pretty strong and they helped one team get really ahead in vision. No longer the case. Good change. The only thing I really don't like is taking away the mobile kiosk. Instead, it is the mobile VLS.
To me, it makes sense as the mobile VLS is one of the main gimmicks of the season, and I can definitely see how a mobile version would be helpful, especially since you could call one in at a VPad to use at any time. So having one on demand is very helpful.
Yeah, my only thing is I wish that they increase the rate that animals drop mobile kiosks now, especially past day 3.
That would have been nice. And then the other big change is that the tech skill module will always be available from Lumi and will not take up the spot of another rare item such as a meteor or Fourscore.
Yep, this is a great change. And then we have the credit changes that I alluded to earlier. We are overall gaining more credits as the days go by because of how they changed farming a little bit. So to counteract this, early game, they've increased the amount of credits you gain, but late game, to make it so it's not so easy to get things like VFs, they've made it equaled out. You won't see this effect too much. It just helps with the tempo and the flow of the game. It's a good change overall. You don't need to worry about too much. The bigger changes is now we're starting with less credits, and remote drones and telephotos also cost less credits. Good change overall.
I think it's a great change. It might enable buying in 2 items in a route now, because before it would cost 25, now you can get 2 items for 30. It might enable routes with BIS purple items that you couldn't normally route for.
Yep, 100%. Don't worry about the mobile VLS being bought in the VPad. This already got taken out back, rightfully so. It was really just there for a fun option during preseason. Even they admitted it and just immediately axed it when they saw what was happening with it. Good change again. Battle zones are no longer with us. They'll never really be missed.
The devil is dead.
Never missing it. And then the last thing is, again, just balancing the game flow for the changes to battle zones. Something I will say is that battle zones make it so less RNG on which team dies. It feels very good when you're actually snowballing and your tempo doesn't get messed over because some team got a really big boon from a battle zone, or you went into a battle zone and just lost it all. It's a very good change.
Yep. I think these changes, along with them adjusting the time cycle of Night 2, which we see right here, it actually affects the game a lot. It takes a lot of getting used to. The game flow has been changed quite a bit. Another big thing is we're seeing zones, or the amount of zones closing earlier is a bit more, but we're also seeing zones being lifted a bit earlier, which just encourages team to move around the map a lot more, which is overall a healthy change for causing more people to die, which is better for hopefully making there not be 7 teams alive every ranked lobby.
Yeah, I have to agree. The tempo and how fast things feel. I know that some people aren't going to like it to start off, but trust me, once you get used to it, it feels so much better, especially in a lot of these more competitive lobbies. It feels better to even just watch it when I've been seeing some in-houses going on. Before, I would get bored and kind of fall asleep watching some of the competitive series last season. I don't think it's going to be happening this season. Great changes. We will talk more about this change in particular later, and this one, because they all cover the same thing. We'll get to that when we cover the patch B part. Now onto our newest recruit, the Raven. We finally have everything that it's doing. Ravens spawn early, they're decently tanky, and they go between 2 designated points between their respective areas.
Also worth noting that there's a Raven in every zone as well. Possibly 2, depending on the zone.
There is a sound update when a Raven approaches you, or you approach the Raven. You can use this actually to know if there's another person in your zone. It's a good change, good sound update. Ravens will drop gadgets, like the secret lab key. It's a pretty good rate too, so it's worth farming them, especially onwards past night 2. And something that when I had originally first read this, I didn't think was going to be that big. I was wrong entirely. The Lucent Berry is insanely good. You'll kill a Raven and you can see a fourth of the zone guaranteed around you. It is insane.
And if the vision range does hit a enemy test subject, then they will be revealed to you for the next 4 seconds.
I did not appreciate this change enough when I had first seen it. Don't sleep on that. Now onto the stats we do know for the Raven. They are surprisingly strong, not to the point where it's like a bear and a person could lose to it, but it could very much take off around a fourth of your HP bar, especially the mutant variant. They give an equally good amount of credits. They don't take up too much time farming, but it definitely doesn't feel like a chicken or a bat, I should say, where you can kill it very easily with half a rotation of 90% of the cast. Mutant Ravens are usually going to take around a full rotation, obviously minus your ult.
I don't think their damage is too high. They are a lot tankier than you'd expect. I think one main thing is you can also try to catch them out in different areas to get like more tactically reveal vision of different areas, which I think I have not seen players utilize yet, but that is something worth noting. I think overall just more animals, good addition to the game.
Another change that we've seen is the wild animals dropping item adjustments. I think this has landed good in my opinion. When I kill them, I kind of get confused when they're dropping things like ice or glass bottles, but it's been a good help. I really like how it affects macro and how you can actually look to farm animals when you're walking through a zone, and you don't necessarily have to check all of these boxes for a chance that you get the components for your gold items. You can just kill animals on your way. There's a good chance that they'll drop most of the stuff you need. I think it's very intuitive for new players as well, because just killing animals will get them their next items that they need, or maybe even the items that they haven't been able to obtain from normal looting.
Yeah, after playing with this in-game, I did not think it would come up very often at all, but even after just playing a few games, I had it, make me get an item much easier multiple times.
The big change then, guaranteed vision animals in every zone, is mutant chickens getting their credit gain adjusted. We lost 2 mutant chickens per horde, but on the person who gets the kill on them, they get double the credits now, turning these into a 18 to 27 credit gain, depending on everyone on your team. It can turn guaranteed into 14 credits for one person, and the other 2 still get the same, well, roughly the same amount that they were before. This is really good for if you are trying to feed a specific person on your team, and it better adjusts and counters split farming in the way that we were abusing it in higher elos. Another change that I was not expecting to dramatically affect the feel of the game so much was the box capacity increase. It really feels nice to route right now. If you find a route that works, but it needs a little more items on average than you would find before, you just get it almost guaranteed every single game. This feels great.
Yeah, especially if you spawn with another person, even then, you guys can both get your items most of the time, unless you are both specifically contesting a single item a lot. Then you actually can still get most of your items.
Yeah, this is another like very small change that just goes such a long way. The next major change that we saw were the removal of a lot of key bushes in zones that were used to cheese out opponents, and overall just I didn't really care for. I don't know if you cared for these specific bushes, Jignut, but I'm happy most of them are gone.
Specifically the warehouse and hospital one, I'm really happy those are gone. Quite the nasty bushes to camp into, especially if you have characters that can really capitalize on hitting characters out of vision.
100%. I'm glad these bushes are gone. Another small change that just goes so far when you're playing the game. The new weather changes actually didn't really matter at all, so we won't be going over them. The next point we will be covering is dancing. Dancing is seen as a new control option, a less used thing in the game. Control options usually bring up a certain voice line for your character. However, now we have dancing for each character guaranteed. I believe the only character that does not have a dance or is bugged right now is Lenore's. I'm not entirely sure though.
Some characters do also share some dance animations. It's really the much older ones that don't have their own dance animations. But also I have even seen some rare skins have different dance animations than their base skins as well.
They did say that all epic skins will have a different dance going forward in the future, so it's a very cool thing to add. Very happy everyone really wanted this. Now, that is the last major change. We'll be going into what most of this patch has been made for, which are the movement speed changes. They covered them a little bit at the start here in part 1, but most of the changes are in part 2, affecting items and characters. As we can see, what this mainly will do is make it not as terrible for low movement speed characters and punish higher movement speed characters. Of course, they don't want to actually punish them in the same way. They like the place where the game is. So what you'll see is, on average, every single movement speed change functionally only moved the value either 0%, 2%, forward, or backward. It's very much the same. This is of course different once you get to really high additional movement speed, where it gets cut pretty much in half from the original value in order to make place for a soft cap. This was mainly done for Lumi, and they didn't really care about the edge cases of, let's just say, Knife Jackie, pressing R with Amp Drone, Wisdom, Robes, running through a speed gate. That's going to be a lot higher movement speed than before, but they weren't really thinking about that. It's just a cool implementation to add. You can see on the screen right now most of the characters that got affected by this. It's quite literally most of the cast though, so it might be hard to really fit them all in there. Now, going into our character and item changes. Again, we will not be mentioning the movement speed changes all that much. We'd be here all day. Our first major change is Nadine. Nadine was told in the dev stream just to be getting a little bit of skill amp increased on her monkey wire. Not really the big change that really mattered here. She lost her range increase on Q. Before, if you increased your attack range with E shift and getting 50 wild stacks, you would get a way longer Q. They're just getting rid of this, and that's very good because it was really hard to fight this character and know consistently how far her Q range was going to be because it was just inconsistent. You had to just know.
A very healthy change. A bit of a nerf to Nadine, but overall something that is good for the game.
Another major nerf to a character is Nikki losing her W's ability to remove all debuffs.
Yeah, this is a pretty big nerf. Of course, she still retains the CC immune, but not being able to cleanse her debuffs is a huge hit to the character.
On to another big change. Razi gained base stats, but lost her passive chocolate consumption. This really does hurt the character because she's not getting more out of Goliath, and she's losing her passive that made her so strong with hot chocolate. It's in the right direction. Also, the other two changes are just movement speed. It's in the right direction for the character, and we'll probably see her be able to be balanced more accurately to not create such a terrible place for this character all the time. Luke had a lot of major changes, but we'll talk about most of it in the hotfix because he did get day 1 hotfixed. We'll go over how he's landed there. On to the next rework that we saw, Mize. I think that she's landed pretty well, and most people are way more happy to have one on your team. How do you feel about it? I assume you've played a couple games of Mai.
Yeah, I've played it a bit. Can definitely say it landed well. So Mai now, as we stated before, gets to upgrade her teammates' chess pieces, just upgrade the stats on them instead of having her own specific equipment that only she can create. Helps build a lot more. You no longer are forced to build a Mai piece and kind of jump around with your CDR or anything like that. And also her ult got a range increase for allies, but lost her W effects for them, as well as getting a slight increase to the heal. It's worth noting that if she uses it on herself, she does still get the Shaw Veil on herself, and she still gets the invincibility frames as well. Overall, I think the changes are very healthy for the character. She might not be so dominant in pro play and finally be able to kind of be allowed to settle down in solo queue more, be more balanced for solo queue rather than completely revolving around pro play with this rework. So I think it's good.
Yeah, there's one thing to note with her new items, because she actually does have a special interaction again, much in the way that Mai deserves. Tactical armor got +2 armor penetration, taking it from 12 to 14. What this allows when you have a Mai on your team is that you only need 2 items, Tactical Armor and Iron Maidens, to guarantee proc the passive. You might actually see some really interesting combos with this. Just for an example, say a crit character like Kadia. She can now run Tactical Armor and Iron Maidens and have her other 2 slots be critical chance along with her weapon. This gives Kadia effectively an execute for cheap, and it doesn't affect her build that much. You might see it affect some of her CDR, but not all of the builds are running CDR anyways.
Now we have Vanya's small rework. It just helps her catch her butterfly a bit easier and moves around with her, and then of course the movement speed changes. Overall, small changes just helps let the character play a bit better, a bit new player friendly, and also can help you just catch the butterfly more, which is essential to her kit. It's good changes.
Yep, overall not hurting the character that much, and actually giving her a lot more skill expression because the butterfly Q will go out further, allowing you to walk forward as a melee and potentially dodge it. Our next major non-movement speed related change is Celine. Before, her R could stack up to 5 times with R1 bombs. Now it's going down to 3. The character was very oppressive in zones where she would get there early and be able to just spam her R button, so it makes sense that this would eventually get hit.
Yeah, approaching a Celine with 5 bombs on the floor felt impossible, so this will make it much more bearable.
Now, Sylvia is a particular movement speed increase because she actually got some of her damage changed overall while on it. Her auto after getting off the bike got reduced, and the cooldown got lowered for her R. From what I can see, this has been mainly a positive change, but we'll have to wait and see if it affects the character too much. It looks to be very positive though.
It really lets Sylvia change between human and bike form much more often, allowing for much smoother combo sequences with her different abilities. It's the main change that has really helped her out.
A change that I wish that they would revert, but instead I just have to hope and pray that they limit her more. Adela has 2 max charges on her W. The charging duration did get increased by overall around double at max rank. I still don't think this is enough. Realistically, it should still get added at least 2 seconds onto it because, of course, Adela still has CDRs she can apply to her W.
Fighting Adela is going to be a lot harder now with her having Ws much closer together, especially in the mid game when her cooldown was still relatively doable. But now she'll have that up very often, especially at the start of fights. So you'll have to really play for long fights against Adela to play for that opening window when she does run out of charges eventually. Overall, not looking forward to this change, but we'll see exactly how it lands.
Arda, getting a little bit of a quality of life, but overall just a buff. Now, instead of at the end of your skills, Arda will give his teammates his healing from his passive when it hits. This is just a lot better to play around, and overall just a lot better for solo queue.
Yeah, a lot of the times you would see Arda press RWW and his teammates die because they don't get healed in time, because he would not get the healing until the skill ends. Now he'll get the healing right away. It can actually make a big difference in fights.
Another rework that I was not expecting the magnitude of, Elena got completely changed. She's a lot tankier now, and even though her damage did get changed around a little bit, it seems to be a little worse off for her. This character is dealing more on average because she's just staying alive for so long. It's one of the ones where we can realistically expect a nerf.
Next we have the Rillium rework, who has really become stronger for players who can really utilize his strong and unique playstyle. He now gets his basic attack range increased for a single auto attack after catching a baseball. 0.5 auto attack range increase is pretty big. It's worth noting that his weapons only gave him a 0.35, so it's overall going to be higher for that one auto. His defense was now moved to his W instead of whenever he does pick up a baseball, so he won't be as tanky when he's dashing around. And then of course he has a new passive on his E which allows him to move towards his balls faster. I don't think this is a huge change as his dash range was pretty forgiving, but more movement speed is more movement speed. Overall, it'll help out the players who are really good at William with the high skill ceiling. A bit scared of what a good William can do with him now and how untouchable he'll be with this basic attack range, so we'll have to see how it really lands.
Yeah, really just gonna have to hope that the lack of a defense just hurts the character so much. You can bait out his W and then blow him up. While still a movement speed change, Camillo didn't see the normal one where they just gave him more.
When Camillo ulted, or when he returned from his ult, he would get a very brief movement speed increase. It's a pretty huge movement speed increase, but since it was so short, as you can see 0.55 seconds, it wouldn't allow you to do too much with it. Increasing it by 0.3 seconds actually lets you get pretty meaningful distance off of it. So this is a relatively big change, especially for if you're duending in tone with an entire team. This lets you run away from them or run towards them a lot faster or for longer, which will help you escape or target their backline more. This is just a different change, so we wanted to highlight it.
An interesting change, really nerfing Felix's ceiling. His E no longer can gain an infinite amount of stacks for him. We saw this mainly in matchups against AR characters or double hit characters like Camillo, Lita Lin, that Felix would just be able to get so much out of them and have pretty much infinite uses of his E and auto them to death while they couldn't touch him. Lowering the ceiling and giving him nothing in compensation seems like a bad thing, but I'm sure now that this character's ceiling has gotten nerfed and what he can really do, it's very likely we'll be able to see Felix buffs and maybe he's a more solo queue viable character at tiers like Diamond.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely probably see some compensation buffs in the next patch. It makes sense. This is a very hard hit to the character.
And that is the last major change that we have seen for the characters. Moving on to the items. Now, there is an across-the-board nerf on items, specifically to the base VF items and the Dawn VF items, with the largest hit being done to Dawn. Base VF items saw 2% knocked off their armor pen, and Dawn items saw all of their weapons, except for one, lose their CDR. Gold items, on the other hand, usually saw the CDR for Cataclysm being moved onto an item that does not have it. They're really trying to make sure you can't get max value out of Cataclysm because it's a CDR weapon. I think all of these changes are in the right direction, though some Dawn weapons really got hit way too hard and gained nothing, most likely leading them to just be worthless on this patch.
Yeah, I think it's overall really healthy changes, especially for these gold Cataclysm weapons that had CDR and Cataclysm. That was just way too high value for like a single gold item, so I think it's a very healthy change. And as for the Dawn ones, I do agree that maybe some more weapon types besides Arcana should keep the CDR, as it is actually a pretty hard way to itemize around now. But we will see if they give any compensation for that, as there are also some new CDR options offered for AMP characters, which we'll see.
Yep, the last thing to mention is actually right here. All base movement speed got turned into a % increase for the weapons and for the armor. We won't be mentioning this too much, as it's again just slight changes that functionally do the same thing as they were doing before. Something to note is that now the only way you can gain base movement speed is actually through movement skills, like Vigor for Suitor Sana and Malachite Machete, and I believe Endeavor AX is the AR version, and Swift Strides. While most VF weapons only saw an across-the-board change, like 2% armor pen being taken off, Bloody Hand Crimson and Dawn both got major changes. We see Crimson getting the empowered Smolder that Dansleaf has, and we see Dawn getting Magnetic Midnight after losing its CDR. I think overall, these will most likely hurt a good chunk of the Fist characters, as they're losing, or at least AP characters are losing their Magnetic Midnight for a tankier Smolder, and the more supportive Amp Glove characters like Leon and Nikki and Alonzo are losing their Lich Grasp. Of course, if they're ever getting the VF, it's a little sus to begin with, except for Leon, but it's still something to note.
Yeah, I think especially for Smolder, there's no real glove character that would really want to take use of it besides Glove Hyunwoo, but again, he's not really applying it all that much in the first place. This does seem like an overall pretty big nerf. And then for, of course, Dawn, Leon especially really liked the slow from Lich's Grasp, and losing that kind of makes it a lot harder for him to hit his knockups on his own now without prior team setup. So overall, pretty big nerfs to Bloody Hand.
Pistol saw a lot of across-the-board CDR changes like all the other weapons. However, it also got some CDR moved around in its golds. Devil's Marksman losing its CDR and Altair gaining it. The only other major change is Double Tap getting more skill amp but losing the character level base stat damage for it. It's probably going to be a buff for Stampede because if you're staying on Stampede for a while, it's very likely your character like Lenny, and you're just rarely ever upgrading it. However, the overall changes to pistols, amp pistols in particular, is most likely going to be negative. As we can see, Dawn, one of the weaker VF pistols, just lost CDR and gained basically nothing in comparison.
The next weapon type that we really have seen some bigger changes for is the Dagger. Specifically for Malice, we have seen a decrease of the Brute Enforcer passive across the board. On Inquisitor, the chest piece as well. It is losing the skill amp increase from 20% to 15%. It's getting 10 amp in return. This is an overall okay change. 10 amp is a lot. It's going to be a bit stronger, but overall, just okay changes. And then going down to the Blood Daggers, we now see Dawn getting a completely new passive. Okay, well, not new passive. We see Dawn getting the Brute Enforcer passive. It has the same values as the other ones, not any stronger. But the one major interaction change of this is that because of the adaptive force it offers, Daniel can now actually utilize this passive, which he normally was not able to due to it only being on an amp chest piece. Now he can utilize this passive since he is still very skill damage focused. He'll be able to get access to this 15%, which is pretty ridiculous. It'll really help him kill his targets harder. It's like guaranteed death if he gets this now and you're squishy.
Yep, a very interesting change to give to an overall niche audience. We still might see Daniel running the Crimson variant just because it's so much movement speed with Swift Strides, but we can definitely see this as just a I'm going to kill one person guaranteed button now. A overall smaller change, but still of note, Dawn lost the CDR and Biotic Infusion, but gained Magnetic Midnight. We're most likely seeing this to be in line with the Mithril version of the Axe, but I don't know if it's going to be an exact buff to the characters, because while they can now run the Biotic Infusion arm no matter what they're on VF-wise, it does hurt to have the weaker Biotic Infusion, especially for characters like Estelle and Abigail.
The values for Magnetic Midnight are just not going to add up to do the same damage as Biotic Infusion, and especially for Estelle, whose way of proccing this effect is already a stun, the slow from Magnetic Midnight really is not doing much for her.
Seeing a hammer that realistically no one was building, Leviathan, getting Swift Strides and an attack speed reduction. I still think no one's going to build this just because we don't have a hammer character at the moment that wants the stats, but when we do get one, you can definitely see him running this. Hammers have a lot of really good weapons, but they have a lower amount of people who can actually use them.
Some stat shuffling for dual swords. We will now see Ligor and Zahir get healing reduction and lose Cataclysm, and instead Cataclysm will be moving over to the newer dual sword, Thanatos. Same values and everything, it's just moved around to different weapons.
Nunchaku will be seeing a change from a rare item to an epic item in Sharper. It's an interesting change, but I don't really even know if Piolo is going to run this, in all honesty. This seems like nothing to really give one character who will most likely just go right back to what he's been doing the entire time. Arcana, a very interesting weapon type, as all of the characters who have it are AMP instead of AP. Arcana is not seeing any CDR changes, and rather only the base VF of the weapon changed to 10%. I guess they just really weren't feeling it. Arcana's already very specialized. They didn't see the need for it.
Just a minor change to two-handed swords. We're getting a new base weapon amp sword. This might be in preparation for Hisui, who may potentially be a two-handed character. Overall, not much to say about this. It's just a new weapon. I'm not really sure how it compares with the other amp weapon, which is Arcane Edge. It might just be a different routing option. Not too much to say about this. And then we also have Dainsleif Dawn losing its CDR, of course, and also losing its Spirit Harvest passive for Lich's Grasp. It is a 99% slow Lich's Grasp, definitely stronger than the base one. However, losing Spirit Harvest is a pretty big damage decrease, but it will help out specifically Fiora, who is the amp two-handed sword user, maybe land her combo a bit more consistently.
Another character who could maybe use this, if you are ever giving Alex a VF for whatever reason, he can build Dainsleif. 99% slow is really nice. They took it away from him originally and now it's back. Who's to say, really? The next major change comes from Throw. Amp characters are getting a Strape, originally a crit AP throw item, being turned into a Spirit Harvest item. Before, in order to get access to Spirit Harvest, they would have to use an entire VF and a Dawn Shard. This is no longer the case though, and I think this is a step in the right direction for these characters.
We've seen a lot of these changes similarly last season, with some characters getting Cataclysm before their Blood Weapon, which made a very certain Haze become S tier instantly, so we'll see if that happens here. I'm sure Adriana getting this weapon or passive much earlier will definitely have them be happy about this change.
100%, not having to give up a head slot and instead having it in the weapons, very good. A change specifically made for William, as the attack range got taken away from his character, he's now getting Echoing Strike on his main weapon of choice. This is a very strong passive, especially for William, who stacks AP so effectively.
Not only that, overall, he lost the attack range, but he has it on his character's kit now, and he actually gained 15% attack speed, the passive, and only lost 2 AP. This weapon looks really overstated now.
The first thing to cover in armor is actually Holy Orders. Holy Orders saw an entire change to the unique passive skill amplification. They lost 5% total damage. However, in compensation, they're gaining it back generally in their skill amplification of the item itself. This was most likely done because there's now a mithril tier of Holy Orders items, with the specific one I'm referring to being Pharaoh's Artifact. Onward to the rest of the chess pieces though, as we saw a lot this patch be added into the game that we had saw from the dev stream.
The first change, as stated before, this is now a craftable item by everyone and not just Mai, and instead of being a tank blazing dress upgrade, it is now a stacking passive for AP characters. It has very lackluster base stats with having 3 attack power per level and 20 defense. However, its passive will grant 3 AP and 5% attack speed on every auto attack, stacking up to 10 times for a total of 30 AP and 50% attack speed. The stats that this passive gives is quite insane, definitely making up for the item's lack of base stats, and also this only costs a tree, which is quite ridiculous for the amount it's giving. And of course, at max stacks, you get 10% armor pen just as a little added on bonus to make it even better.
It is interesting though, despite everything going for it, I think this item is still very much niche on most of the cast, and realistically, you'd want another item we'll be talking about soon, Beautiful Garment, instead of it, because it just takes too long to get 10 stacks up and a fight not already be decided. Mythal Crop, another old Mai item, now has a streamlined passive. I was not necessarily expecting this, and I don't know how good it will be realistically, but it is cool to have more streamlined, especially on just so many items. Mythcrop, of course, is a cool item, and I'm happy they did something with it. They might end up changing this in the future, as I don't really know if I'll see any characters running streamlined if they don't already have it in a weapon or on like Myth Shield, but maybe we'll see.
I have seen some characters like running streamlined, but not desiring the stats quite that the items that were on. I have seen this item has not been received too well, as losing the CDR on it has not landed great for the item. It does still have a bit higher defense than some other tank chess pieces, so it has that going for it, and the passive is quite nice. It just seems a bit underwhelming now without the CDR. Next up, another new passive on Aodai, craftable by anyone now. Aodai lost a lot of stats. It still costs a 4 score too. It loses its attack speed, its cooldown reduction, and its SP regen. However, in return, it gains 12% Omni Siphon, which is a pretty large amount. It loses 5 AP, and 6 defense, however gets a new very strong passive deferral. Any damage you take will be gradually applied to you over 3 seconds instead of right away. So if you take 100 damage for example and you're a melee character, then you'll take 80 damage instantly and 20 damage over 3 seconds. Because ranged has a reduced amount of deferral damage, we will likely not see any ranged characters use this. However, melee characters that really want to avoid being bursted and stick around for a long time, this passive is really going to be amazing for them. Specifically, bruisers are going to love this passive a lot, and with the Omni Siphon that it gives, it's going to help them heal up any of the deferral damage before they can actually die and get bursted down.
Yep, the only ranged character who can realistically use this passive is Tsubame, a diver with no real sustain and could realistically use the extra 10% time in Omni Siphon to deal with her opponents, depending on her comp. Overall though, I think Aodai has landed very well, especially with characters who are using False Oath and combo with it, to really trade off how much damage they're taking with just so much healing to boot. Courtier, still a Force Core, it has a very interesting passive that I was not expecting to land well, which is Blaze Up Amplified. However, I was just wrong. Courtier is a amazing item, in most cases out damaging your first buy persona now. Just having the 3% skill damage increase at max stacks being 15% is very strong, especially for characters like Soichi who already wanted something similar in Cyberstalker. Now you get it for free on the entire enemy team. I really downplayed how strong this passive is.
Not to mention, at max stacks you'll also get that 15% Omni Siphon bonus, which, as we just talked about, that is a lot of Omni Siphon. It can help you stay alive a lot longer. Next up, we have a weaker variant of a Blaze Up than we saw on Phantom Jacket. We see Ghillie Suit losing 14% attack speed, but getting the new Blaze Up passive, which will give 5% attack speed, stacking up 5 times for 25% in total. This is about a 10% overall increase to Ghillie Suit's attack speed once you've fully stacked the passive. Overall, it's a good change. It still only costs a tree. It's just giving Ghillie Suit a bit more strength overall for keeping the price the same. Just a buff to Ghillie Suit in general.
Yeah, and because it's only 5 autos again, it's usually in line with most characters' adrenaline stacks. Making those adrenaline carries really want to look to it, as they don't need the extra 4 attacks after they get their adrenaline stacked to start being useful. On top of it all, it still has crit, and as we've seen the crit chess pieces, they don't have the best defense and they were really weak in Season 5. However, now they have so much to offer, just like our next one, Spectre, gaining heal reduction. Spectre already had very good stats, it was just really hard to route in the items that you wanted. Most of this came down to lacking heal reduction in metas where you need it in order to play the game. Giving it heal reduction opens up builds like Spectre, Legatus, and Dice, and on top of that you can still run another item like, say, Red Shoes, which gives healing reduction on top of it, but its lower version, Galaxy Steps, does not, making it a clean transition overall. This is a very good change for Spectre to have, and after some items get nerfed, I can definitely see this becoming the meta.
Yeah, Spectre really benefits a lot from this. Marksmen were kind of forced onto running Cowboy Hat for a very long time, because that's their only real way to slot in heal reduction if they didn't have it through some other form such as a weapon. This really opens up the different build pathing for ADCs and just other characters that would want Spectre. So this is overall a very good change for build variety.
I think a adjustment but overall slight nerf is Mithril Armor losing its flat 0.08 movement speed and instead gaining Swift Strides, where now it has a higher max out, so if you're running away for a while, it will be a buff, but through movement to movement, it's going to be a little worse. You can definitely now see Mithril Armor serving one purpose and Racing Suit serving the other, so I think it's a very good change where now Mithril Armor is out of combat movement speed and Racing Suit is in combat movement speed.
Yeah, as I said before, Myth Armor keeping the CDR is really what has made this the much more preferable option over Myth Crop, which makes sense as CDR is an important stat, and especially for characters that wanted to run CDR weapons and can't anymore, this is a easier way to get CDR. Next up, similar to Ghillie Suit, Beautiful Garment is also going to see a different variant of the Blaze Up passive. This one instead will enhance their attack power, stacking up to 5 times, and the base item lost 5 attack power. Once fully stacked, you'll see a 10 attack bar increase. This item already offers a lot of attack speed, so stacking it up won't be too hard, and it is just a overall small buff to the item.
Yep, I think that this now makes Beautiful Garment the best item for any attack power carries that really want or need it and can't play with Phantom Jacket's excessive amount of autos needed. You scale up really fast and you'll usually beat out most Phantom Jacket players because by the time they get 10 autos up, you've already won the game with your increased attack power from the 5 autos that you only needed. The change we talked about earlier, Holy Orders. Not much else to go over here. With that, we will be talking about Omerta. Omerta is generally outclassed by Aodai right now, except it does have CDR, and not a small amount of that, and its passive is very cool depending on the character. I've mainly seen it be excessive on Alex, seeing him get up to 600 AP, which was a number I thought I'd never see on a character.
Yeah, for sure. Omerta's usage will still be quite niche, as there are a lot of other stats that chess pieces have to offer. Omerta's kind of the raw stat one of I want to get that really high AP number, which characters don't always want, but since it does still have the 20% CDR, it's still definitely going to see some use. It's just kind of niche on its usage, similar to some other items like Phantom Jacket. Next we have Inquisitor actually getting some pretty big changes. Inquisitor, like the other Brute Enforcer passes, will be going down from 20% to 15%, and it will also lose 5 amp. In return, it will be getting 15% cooldown reduction, which is genuinely a huge change. This item getting cooldown reduction and only really losing 5 amp for it is definitely a positive change, and along with the new skill amp percentage item on your arm, Pharaoh's Artifact, this really opens up a lot of build variety with being able to play with chess piece and headpiece passives, along with retaining your skill amp increase passives. This opens up a lot for amp characters, as well as just the CDR that they lost on their weapons they can now get here, along with a passive that they really love.
Yep, we might actually see skill amp characters not all run the same build now, despite how good it was, and I think build diversity for them is exactly what all the people who are playing those characters wanted, so this is a great change. Another bigger change than most would perceive, Elegant Gown is finally gaining the cooldown reduction cap plus 5%, giving you something similar to Queen of Hearts, but on a mithril item. This is really good. It does the same thing functionally as Inquisitor, where you're not locked to using a tank item or losing your arm piece to gain this 5% cooldown reduction cap, and you're only losing 5 skill amp for it, so I think we're going to see a lot of people run this.
Yeah, this item was almost never used with how good other amp chess pieces were, like Revenant, Blood Cloak, Holy Orders. All of those were really popular. This definitely gives Elegant Gown a much better case for being used. Titan's Armor getting a very, very small nerf to its stats and losing 1 defense and 4% attack power, and in return getting heal reduction. This is overall a very good buff. Gives tanks another way to access heal cut, or bruisers who want that attack speed. Overall, very good way. More heal cut in the game is always good, especially since it feels almost necessary nowadays.
Yep. From the people I've talked to, apparently Isaac mains are very happy about this. Getting Titan Armor and Helix means they open up a slot that isn't Wild Walkers to actually be able to play around with. Overall, this has been a great change for them, and I'm sure a lot more people throughout the patch and even the entire season will really come to love this item for what it is.
Next we have the headpieces. The first new headpiece is Fencing Mask, which is an amp headpiece that will cost a 4 score. It has 10 defense, which is quite rare in amp headpieces, also a high amount of skill amp, and a different version of the Blaze Up amp passive. This one, instead of granting Omni Siphon at max stack, it will grant movement speed instead, while keeping the same increasing skill damage by 3% per stack. Overall, this item has not been as popular and is more niche for characters that want the movement speed more, but has been very well received still.
Yep, from testing that I've done on multiple characters, it seems that Fencing Mask with Holy Orders is actually a higher damage output than Courtier and Persona. So it does give those characters who really only care about damage or really need the movement speed to have this option and it to be so effective. Next, Smart Glasses, a less than well-received item despite on paper how many people it could really help. The issue with Smart Glasses as it stands is it doesn't have the proper attack power and attack speed that it needs to really serve the niche that it wants. on top of it, your next basic attack doesn't gain the defense reduction like other skills would normally give it. Because of this, Taser Gun / Smart Glasses has become an incredibly niche item that you could honestly expect to see some changes made to it, such as the first basic attack actually getting defense reduction on it, the cooldown being changed to better fit these bruisers that want to permanently apply it on someone, say like Commander's helmet does. And overall, it just hasn't landed as well as I think a lot of people really want it to, because it's just too weak.
Yeah, the passive looks very good on paper. The item is just unfortunately does not have the stats to live up to how it wants to be used quite yet, so we'll likely see some changes to this item. Small changes is all it needs. Finally, our last change of the items, we have Myth Boots getting a new passive, losing 2 defense and 6% attack speed. Not too big of a loss for this new stat, being slow resistance. It seems like they're going to be experimenting with the stat to see if people really want it. Myth Boots was a not very utilized item. It did have a ton of attack speed, but most AP characters are, or at least attack speed characters, are going to want to be running crit shoes or blade boots for the heal cut. This really gives a different niche for the item to make it much more desirable. Slow resistance is going to be a very interesting stat, as movement speed changes have definitely going to be a huge part in why this is a thing, and it is a very interesting change.
Yes, after a good chunk of the items get nerfed and slows become to really show how strong they are in the current meta after all of the changes, I can really expect Mithril Boots with, say, Spectre, Legatus, and Dice to really pop up a lot on a lot of carries. Because it gives defense and such high attack speed, it makes up for the major weakness you take when you're taking Spectre, which is you don't gain any attack speed.
Next change, a small but good change. All food will now stack up to a max of 6 instead of 4. This is a really good change, a very small change. There's a lot more cameras in the game and potentially transition items, so I have actually noticed this change opening more slots in my inventory, which has been very nice.
Yeah, it's just another really small change that goes a long way, just like this next one, which is Force Core finally having a use for water. You can finally eat any extra Force Cores that your team gains.
Next up, all trap and camera building materials have been removed. Gunpowder remains in the game as it is still an essential component for some things. Traps will only be available to be called in now through the V-pad, as well as cameras. Binoculars and base cameras are completely removed, as well as all the other green and blue trap variants.
Yep, overall just a nice change since most people didn't interact with traps. I think this is a positive change, and of course they still keep remote mines that you can make with gunpowder now. So they kept most of the traps that people would actually use and got rid of all of the other ways that, people weren't actually interacting with. Next, as we've actually gotten to play with all of these item changes now, I can confidently say I really like all of the changes they did to areas. It feels like every single character has at least 1-2 path they can run and have their best in slot items available in a 3 path. It was a great change, and I'm happy that they did what they did with it.
Yeah, especially with the 3 new base items, well, 2 new base items and 1 new green item they added, and some item recipe changes. The diversity of a lot of routes has really changed. Now we have multiple routes that we can run, multiple different zones, and more 2 zones available, and routes are easier to complete thanks to the every box having 8. Overall, looting and routing has never felt better.
Onto the hotfix. This is mainly where we will be talking about Luke as our first change. Luke's changes were kind of negative in my opinion. It definitely helps with the character, but it made him feel a lot worse to fight, and he's definitely an S tier pick right now. As has happened, we are seeing his main issues be addressed, which is his mark damage being lowered a little bit, his R's base damage being upped a little bit, and nerfing his healing overall since he gets it so often now. All really good changes. I don't know if it's going to be enough to really help it, address all the issues with Luke, but there is a chance this character might actually get to a good place where he's not completely useless or completely overpowered, depending on build.
Definitely a step in the right direction, that's for sure.
The other major change is to the secret labs and VLS. VLS, we saw just some overall adjustments being made, getting rid of it from the V-pad, making the stun longer overall, and changing the vision gained. All of these are a step in the right direction to making it perfect.
Yeah, you won't be able to see what's happening below you until you're a bit lower. You also have a slightly reduced vision range, so you can't see as far. And then another huge change is you're going to be stunned a lot longer now when you land. This is good because you could land in the middle of team fights and then almost be able to instantly act, which was a bit unfair for anyone who wanted to react to you in turn. It just wasn't enough time to run away from someone who landed on top of you. I think this will be enough, which is good. And some adjustments to secret labs. You now have 10 less seconds to stay in the labs, only 70 now, and you can actually leave the labs earlier. I'm not quite sure why this was a thing, but they were before forced you to stay in the lab for at least 30 seconds when you could potentially clear them much faster. Now it's only 20 seconds, so there shouldn't be any issues with that, and you will now only be able to access these labs before day 5, not day 6 anymore.
The other major changes are reducing the chances that mutants have of dropping these special materials that could very easily flip it and make a mutant lab effectively turn into a blue lab. They're forcing the blue lab from being dropped by mutant ravens to being in only one epic air supply box dropped on night 3, meaning that one team is just going to get lucky, and I actually kind of like this. This is a good change compared to before.
Yeah, you're really going to want to be contesting these purple boxes on night 3 now.
Yep.
And of course, the gamma drops will also be adjusted. Before, you got 1 tree, 1 meteorite, and 1 tack. This was set in stone. Now, you will randomly be getting one of a tree, meteorite, or mithril, and always getting guaranteed a tack skill and a bunch of credits.
Yep, overall a step in the right direction compared to the pretty much one person gets a 4-score attack skill that was happening when we go into these blue labs. It's a lot better. The other main change in this hotfix is we're actually seeing a change to restricted area counters, most likely because VLS will force you to be in areas for a little bit longer than you'd like. They're increasing it so it's less likely you die in the air just from not being able to take a fight or get a kill early, and if you're using multiple back-to-back, you have that 35 seconds total. I think this is pretty good. Of course, you are getting less restricted area from getting kills, but overall, if you kill like 2, now you have a guaranteed 35. It's really nice.
Yeah, overall, the change makes sense, and it's a good change. I don't have much to say about it. It's just another small thing that can make the difference easily.
Yep, you can really see that they've been focusing more on the feel of the game than just the nitty-gritty of it, and I really like this. The small changes are going such a long way, and this season's been really fun to play so far. The last change that we will be covering is Laura getting a small nerf. I assume it's because she was overperforming with Courtier, and Aodai having the correct amount of damage applied to these ranged carries, as before it was 15% and that wasn't enough. Now it is the correct amount they had set from the beginning. With that, the next patch that we will be covering is patch 1.37. They've already given us a little bit of the view into it, but seeing as 1.36 really didn't feel like a full patch despite how long it was, it's likely that 1.37 will be the final patch that really puts the season together, and as it's our ranked patch, that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the next patch. It'll probably be another large patch, as it's the patch that ranked is launching on. So we will see you then.